I want to talk to you today about anger. I'm going to actually start a discussion about anger today. It'll be in several episodes because anger is so important in the Christian life and in life in general. I'm Dr. Gilionescu. I'm a practicing physician. I'm also a practicing Christian. And this is part of a series on this channel where I explore with you the healing nature of several Bible passages that have profound implications for our daily life and specifically how we deal with different issues, emotional issues, mental health issues in general. And like I said today, I want to focus on anger. Now, as you well know, I don't need to tell you this, anger is a powerful experience. It's an emotional state. It's almost like a trance. When it comes over us, our focus narrows, we can't see what's happening around, we are laser focused on the object or on the trigger of what caused us to become angry. It comes in outbursts, and in a very short period of time it can do a lot of damage. And I wanted to start this discussion today about anger by pointing your attention to this text, to this verse in James chapter 4, where James describes what we can understand as the root cause of the anger experience. And oftentimes what he describes here is an emotional state, is a state of mind in which our inner urgings or passions, as the English translation puts it here, are at war within us. We have certain expectations, we have certain desires, we pursue certain pleasures, and things don't go our way. And in that moment, for every one of us, the trigger is different, but the mechanism is the same. There is a trigger, and then the anger response takes over and overwhelms us and goes on for some time. And so I just wanted to try to keep things organized here and say that for anger to happen, you have to have, number one, a trigger. And the trigger can be something as simple as somebody cutting you off when you drive your car. For me, some years ago, it was getting late to an appointment, or being with others who would not be ready and appreciate the importance of being on time. Those were some of the triggers that used to push my button to get angry. And then after this trigger happens, you have the outburst. There is an emotional state. There's a storm of quick-acting stress hormones and other neurochemicals in our brains, in our body, that generate this state of anger, this outburst, once the trigger comes our way. And what happens is we get worked up, we get put in that state. And at that point, once we get into it, we have very little control until and after the anger outburst has run its course, which could be shorter or longer depending on the person and the intensity of the outburst. And then follows the behavior that we pursue, that we display during the anger. So this outburst encompasses certain behaviors that we display. And a lot of times they look silly, they look weird, they are dangerous, of course. And if we would be able to see ourselves from the outside while we perform this, while not being in that angry state, we would sometimes not recognize ourselves. We make a spectacle of ourselves. And so I wanted to delve a little deeper today into this whole phenomenon of anger, what triggers it, what are the consequences of it, following in the future episodes to discuss biblical ways to deal with it. You may be aware, and I'm sure you experience it too, when anger happens, it is one of the strongest emotional states we can experience as humans. in terms of intensity. And while it can be positive, it can be justified at times, it gives us a lot of energy. Unfortunately, in this world where we live, we use a lot of that energy for destructive purposes. We start to tear down on those around us, on things, and it does damage to ourselves. I don't need to tell you how many relationships were broken or damaged, sometimes beyond repair, how many lives were cut short because of anger outbursts. What I do want to focus for a minute, though, today is on the aspect of the damage that anger can do to ourselves. And I want to point you again here. This is from the European Heart Journal in 2014. There's been this interesting article on outbursts of anger as a trigger of acute cardiovascular event. And the idea here was these guys did a meta-analysis. That means they combed the literature, the scientific literature available, for studies that they looked at 6,870 studies where the keyword of anger or outburst of anger or something similar was mentioned, and then they come to them to keep only those articles that specifically looked at the damaging effect of outbursts of anger on somebody's cardiovascular health. And as you can see here, even though they started almost 7,000 studies, after applying all type of filters for quality and specificity and so forth, they ended up with only 9 studies at the end that dealt specifically with this issue. And this is the graph that I wanted to point your attention today on. You see here at the bottom it says incidence rate of cardiovascular events in people who had outbursts of anger. And what you see here at the top, MI and ACS stands for myocardial infarction and also for acute coronary syndrome. These are heart attacks. Several studies showing this vertical line is no effect, no increase, no decrease. If you're on the left side of the line, the risk is lower. If you're on the right side, the risk is higher. And this number here, 2.4, for example, in this study of Mrs. Mostovsky, they found a 2.5 almost increased risk of heart attack and stroke and acute coronary syndrome in people who experience an outburst of anger. And the way the study looked at this was to look at 2 hours after the outburst occurred. In other studies, the increase was as high as 7 times. And the same is true about ischemic stroke. If you look here, you see an increase of over 7 times in the next 2 hours after an anger outburst. The risk of having a stroke is 7 times higher than if you didn't have that outburst of anger. And I've seen people having strokes and heart attacks in this circumstance. Same with breaking an intracranial aneurysm or ventricular arrhythmia. The risk there is not as high, but it is significantly higher. And if you go further down in this, another interesting graphic that I wanted to briefly discuss here is this, where it says frequency of anger outbursts. And here on the vertical, the height of the column stands for excess, extra cases of coronary heart disease per 10,000 individuals per year. As you can see here, if somebody has only 1 anger outburst per month, no matter how much the risk, the 3 column with 3 different colors where it says low, medium, and high stand for low risk, low overall risk of cardiovascular events. They don't have a high cholesterol, they don't have high blood pressure, they don't have diabetes, they don't smoke, and so forth. Those are low risk people, and the highest risk is people who have 2 or more of those high risk factors for cardiovascular, or major risk factors for cardiovascular events. And so if you plot those people across this graph here, you see that if somebody has few to none, less than or 1 per month maximum anger outbursts, the increase or the excess number of cases of coronary heart disease is really minimal, is negligible. But as you get to the 2 anger outbursts a day, you see the increase. You have 63 per 10,000 individuals, even in the low risk. And you have 268 per 10,000 individuals per year in the high risk. But look at this. If somebody makes a habit of getting angry all the time, and they have 5 or more outbursts of anger a day, in the high risk, we are talking about over 650 extra cases of heart attacks and so forth in a year per 10,000 people. This is huge, my friends. This is not something that we need to take lightly. This is not just a behavior that affects others around us or affects things or destroys a relationship, which is bad enough. But this is something that can literally kill us. And so we have to take it seriously. So I wanted to end today by bringing before you a couple more texts from the Bible. And one is in Proverbs 24:7, where it says, "Wrath is cruel and anger is overwhelming." Again, this is stating the reality, but the wording if you go to the Hebrew text, when it says anger is overwhelming, it's using the word that is also used for a torrent or a flood. It literally floods us and covers us to where we can't make it until it consumes itself. And then the second, these things we already discussed, the second text I wanted to end with today is this one here, also in Proverbs chapter 4. Chapter 4 in Proverbs is crucial for a lot of things in terms of healing our emotional and spiritual being. But here you can see where it states that we need to keep our heart with all vigilance. The terminology used here is the one that is used for guarding a prison. We have to be as intentional and as careful as if we were guarding a prison inmates. Our mind, in our state of fallen human beings, is like a bunch of inmates that our thoughts and our emotions are all wrong in many cases. And so we have to make this effort to guard all this thing all the time, because that's where from our heart, which is really the word heart, as we discussed before in the Bible, stands for our inner being, our inner man or woman. This is who we are, essentially. And so in that sense, what that says basically is that we need to guard ourselves, our inner being, in such a way that we don't allow these things to come out. And the reason for that is because from this inner being is where everything that we are and we do in life and where we go from this life springs from. So in that context, and with that promise that we will delve more into this, I want to invite you to think about this more. And then hopefully within the next week, I'll find some time to continue this series where we will discuss how exactly we should deal with anger and how we should follow the biblical advice to do so. Thank you for spending the time to be with me today during this discussion. I appreciate if you found it helpful, if you subscribed, and we will be here together again soon.